Good morning. So we're in the third week of our Lenten series called No Offense. As a foundation for our discussion, we've laid out 3 facts about offense. First fact, offenses are inevitable. Life affords us opportunities to be offended in every way, every day. The second fact is that offenses are a trap because they handicap us and keep us from living up to our true potential. They can cause us to take our focus off of God, who wants the best for us. They can cause us to feel that we're entitled, maybe to an apology. We nourish hurt, anger, jealousy, resentment, bitterness, hatred, and envy in our now heavy hearts. The third fact is that we have a choice about how we handle offenses in our lives. People will say all kinds of things that are thoughtless and careless and can offend us. Of the 2 kinds of offenses, perceived and real, today we want to look at one particular perceived offense. Sometimes each one of us is offended by this, and we would never admit it. We're offended by the truth. I like to say that we all like to be open to feedback in our lives. But sometimes what we really mean is that we're open to glowing praise. Not just praise, but glowing praise. And yet, to be successful in life, we must be able to receive the truth without being offended by it. But if we can't receive honest feedback, we greatly limit our personal development and growth. We all know people that we have to walk on eggshells around because if you tell them the truth, they'll react poorly to it. From the outside, we can see so clearly the dysfunction of their behavior, but we don't share it because we know that they'll be offended. You know, people who love their kids, but are doing some foolish things while raising them. Or smart people who do stupid things with their finances. You know, people who are killing their careers, driving good people away from their desk because they overreact or micromanage. But you've learned to look the other way because they'll overreact. This is so simple to see in other people and so much harder to see in the mirror. So much easier to see in other people and so difficult to recognize in ourselves. That we need honest feedback to grow because we all have blind spots in our lives. You don't know what it's like to be on the other side of you. It boils down to this. If we're the kind of person who cannot receive honest feedback, or if we never listen to the people around us, eventually we'll find ourselves surrounded by people who have nothing to say. They learn to keep their comments to themselves, and we become ignorant of truths that would help us grow and be more successful. There's a cruel irony to this. The very things you love and care about most are the areas that you're sometimes least likely to seek or accept feedback. If you want to be a great mom, then there's a greater chance that you'll be offended by any weaknesses in your parenting skills. If you take great pride in your work, you might easily bristle at any comments that don't correspond to your own assessment. If you want so badly to get married, Maybe you're completely closed to legitimate comments or concerns regarding your Prince Charming or your Princess Charming. It's ironic that we're most easily offended by feedback we most need to hear in areas that we value the most. We see this in today's gospel. John writes, "Since the Passover of the Jews was near, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. He found in the area those who sold oxen, sheep, and doves, as well as the money changers seated there." You can liken Passover week to probably what Disney World will be like this upcoming Christmas after COVID. Everyone will want to be there, and prices will go through the roof. And a lot of people made a lot of money during Passover. And like Disney, the profiteering was mostly dishonest because people were fulfilling religious obligations at the hands of shameless scam artists, which is what these temple merchants and money changers were. It would be like us charging for parking when you fulfill your obligation to attend Mass on Sundays. So back to the gospel, though. These merchants were all in an area of the temple called the Porch of Solomon, which was the only place the Gentiles were allowed to worship. But they couldn't worship because these crooked traders had turned it into a circus. So Jesus gives them some feedback. He made a whip of cords and drove them all out of the temple and said, "Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." The religious leaders who were behind the whole scheme were worse than the merchants because they were becoming very wealthy men off this trade at the expense of ordinary people who were just trying to worship God. And nothing ever angered Jesus so much except the hypocrisy of religious leaders who in turn are offended by his anger. So they say, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do this?" Or another translation might read, "Who the hell you think you are?" Which is sometimes our favorite form of feedback. Interesting, because the Old Testament prophets predicted that the Messiah would come and cleanse the temple corruption. They knew what they were doing was not right. But Jesus says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rebuild it." He was in fact referring to his own resurrection. "I have authority to do what I'm doing because I'm the Son of God." Just before his death, Jesus did something similar. Proof that they would not change. And ironically, these were the people who were tasked to spot the coming of the Messiah. But they were so offended by Jesus that they crucified him instead. They missed God among them because they were so offended by the truth. Here's how not to be like them. First, think of feedback as a present and not as a punishment. Honest feedback is the breakfast of champions. Separate the feedback from your identity. Then lean into honest feedback and ask clarifying questions. Ask for more context. The reason feedback doesn't always seem helpful is because it's not always well presented. People will bring thoughts that are not well communicated. They just felt like they had to say something. We have no control over how information is brought to us, but we can handle and manage that information by asking questions. And finally, give permission to someone to give you honest feedback in a consistent way. When feedback comes from people we know and trust, it's easier to avoid being offended. The best way for you to receive honest feedback is by your personal invitation, and arrange with them to provide the feedback at a time and in a setting that is helpful. Receive the truth and even ask for it. That kind of humility is an open door to the grace that God has to enable us to become the people we want to become.